Hello everyone, welcome to our 6th video lecture, and for this session we'll talk about semantic and grammatical relations and speech functions. So this is basically 2 chapters in Fairclough's 2003 book. Okay, so we'll talk about semantic relations between sentences and clauses, then we'll talk about grammatical relations between clauses, and then we'll talk about types of exchange and speech functions and grammatical modes, and what are the functions of these in terms of deploying ideologies, discourses, etc. So in CDA, we have to understand that the part of speech that is a conjunction have different social functions. Now, of course, they have linguistic functions in the text. No, of course, they provide meaning, but also they reveal any other ideologies or discourses or values that are interlaced into particular sentences or clauses or paragraphs or speeches or other forms of genre. For example, as, while, and, either, nor, once, than, not, but. Of course, they tell us about the flow of the thought and the ideas and the meanings, but also at the same time it infers power, it infers values, it also deploys discourses, ideologies, beliefs. It makes things that are unequal sort and put as commonsensical. So our goal as CDA analysts is to be able to look into these conjunctions, look at their linguistic features, what are the meanings that they're deploying into the text, and how it fits to the larger social structure. Another form of parts of speech are references. So references yung this, that, those, so they also have CDA functions, right? And also, we also think about different lexical chains. So according to Paltridge, lexical chains are words that are connected to each other because they either share a meaning, have a connection with each other. So the most common ones that we know are synonyms. Like, for example, words with similar meanings like big, large, wide, gigantic, right? And then you have meronyms or holonyms, words that describe parts of a whole or the whole itself. So for example, in a chain about a house, roof and wall are meronyms because they are parts of a whole. And then the house is the holonym of both roof and walls. It's very important because you have to think of whether there are times wherein the speaker or the writer of the text will make you focus on the totality, on the large parts of things, so that you can move yourself away from the more granular things, right? So for example, when you talk about let's say voting and arguing that is linked to democracy, right? So voting is just one part of the democratic processes that we have, right? But sometimes we just say that I will fight for democracy, but how exactly do you plan to fight for democracy if you are someone who is running for elections, right? So we're going to forward development. So development is like a very, very vague whole thing. How exactly do you want to do that, right? And so some speakers, particularly, would use certain rhetorics, use meronyms and holonyms, to sort of get our attention away from smaller parts when smaller parts are problematic, or bigger parts when bigger parts are also problematic. And then we have your hyponyms, a word of more specific meaning than a general superordinate term. applicable to it, like spoon as a part of cutlery. So again, it's very much connected to meronyms and holonyms, and looking at macro things and of course the granular things. Then of course you have your antonyms, opposing word, like can also be a part of the chain, though less common. This is something that, let's say, Barack Obama usually uses, yung 3 times niyang sasabihin yung point niya, and then one of those points ay kabaliktaran, is not the antonym, something to that effect, So that's another example of a lexical chain. And then we have the general association, words that are generally associated through concepts like teacher, students, and classrooms, and then books, So these are general associations. Now, let's talk about core semantic relationships between clauses. Now, in many of the texts that we encounter, kumukonti na yung we just say one sentence at a time, like one clause at a time. Usually, in order for us to complete a thought, we have to say sentences that are at least 2 clauses. I did this because I did this, and etc. Whether we are speaking verbally or whether we are typing something, whether that's a report that we're trying to do, a document that we're trying to make, a speech that we're trying to do, a script, a dialogue, or a social media post. So usually, in order for us to have a more complex meaning, to grapple with complex meanings, we usually make use of more than one clause, in a given statement. And the clauses that we use also tells us about a bigger meaning, right? So hindi siya yung 1 plus 1 equals 2, It is really 1 plus 1 equals 3, because of the presence of a particular conjunction that connects 2 clauses together, you have a fuller meaning, And so we have the first core semantic relation is causal. So we use here because, due to, for the reason of, etc. So for causal semantic relationships, we it's a reason for certain things. For example, X happened because Y. It can be consequence, like Y happened, so X. Or it can be the purpose. The clause is a purpose of the other thing. So do X so that, or in order to, Y. Or it can be conditional. If X, then Y. So for example, barangay clinics will extend hours so that workers can access vaccines after their shifts. So that's an example of a purpose, a purpose type of causal semantic relation. And particularly the function there is, again, there is a problematic phrase there. Barangay clinics will extend hours. So again, that there's a little bit problematic there, right? So it's why do we need to extend hours? Why do people have to work? Why do barangay health workers have to work? And so we use the purpose causal semantic relation to give some form of legitimation why they have to extend the hours of work so that workers can access vaccines after their shifts. So, ibig sabihin, for them to be able to get their own vaccines, kailangan nilang mag-extend kasi hindi sila pwedeng bakunahan during the time of their work. So that's an example of legitimation, right? Making things legitimate even if sometimes it can be problematic. Or for example, the usual celebrity. For example, the if-then conditional. I'm so sorry if I offended you. Right? So you're sorry, but the condition is I offended you, but I'm not sorry. Kung hindi ka naman offend, hindi ako sorry. It's very common with celebrity apologies, right? And so, again, like I said, you are offended, I'm sorry. If I say if you are offended, then it brings a new meaning, right? A different meaning. Next is temporal, X happened when after or before Y. So again, this is very important, and what we should catch is not when there are temporal relations, but whether temporal relations are being used to mask causality. Like for example, let's say okay, people policemen, no, were policemen were stationed in the Freedom Park after protesters started to convene. Right? So that's not causal, that is temporal, right? So it seems like the policemen, showing up is just a natural thing that occurs after protesters convene at a Freedom Park. But in reality, there is a reason why policemen show up when there are protesters in a Freedom Park. So again, of course, we can argue about our feelings with the police, but it has something to do with security, right? So to ensure security of the place, diba? So why would a certain speaker say it like temporally, na parang dumating yung mga police pagkatapos mag-convene ng mga relihista, instead of dumating ang police kasi nagkumpol ang mga relihista. Again, certain meanings are lost just because we remove. And also, we also have to check when temporality is removed. Like, everything happens in the present. Like, for example, the time of AI is the time of innovation. Like, have we not been innovating before the time of AI? And so, that kinds of, again, changes the meaning, changes the rhetorics of the sentence, legitimizes something, forwards the importance of AI, puts innovation as very dependent to AI, like a presentism, So again, we have to check for how these were used, Next, we have additive, X and Y, accumulating items or events. We also have to be very careful at that, because when we accumulate things, we usually say that they may be of the same value, in that particular meaning statement. So for example, iba yung explanatory na cases rose because testing sites closed. Right? So, iba yon sa pagkasinulat ko, cases rose, semicolon, clinics shut down, semicolon, staff left. So again, walang causality, walang temporality, there's no causality, there's no temporality. It seems that these things happened as if they were bound to happen. They just happen in terms of several accounts with no agent, right? And so again, there is, again, the issue here, one of the issues here is removing accountability from people, removing reasons from people, especially when the reasons aren't so favorable, right? So this is all rhetorics. And also contrastive, or concessive, like X but however Y. So for example, we have ladderized programs, scholarships, and modular learnings are key reforms. So again, you have their elaboration, you have their additive, right? So you accumulate events. However, rural schools still lack internet. So the difference is shown in terms of however. Now again, we have to look at the presence or the absence of putting however, and what is the particular function, what are the ideas being hidden, what are the concepts being hidden, what are the ideas being legitimized and forwarded. I missed this one, elaboration. X, that is XY or X2, So example, it can be a restatement or a detail. So for example, ng elaboration would be, marami naman akong ginawa para sa bayan. Nagganito ako, nagganyan ako. So I did so many things, during my time. I built infrastructures. I I provided ayuda during COVID. I I made the streets cleaner, right? And so this type of elaboration, also with some additive components, sort of puts the speaker in the light, no, and probably is a way to sort of hide the things that are supposedly good pero hindi niya nagawa. Marami naman akong ginawa Pero for example, question on, but where were we really safe? Were our human rights protected? Where was due process followed? Those are also good things that you could do. But in your elaboration, there are certain things that you listed, right? And you didn't list, right? So again, as CDA analysts, these are the things that we have to look at. Not only the things that we see, but also the things that we don't see, and how the actors or the speakers or the writers make use of grammar, conjunctions, to hide them, to conflate them, to confuse the reader, right? To divert the reader's attention, etc. Now, semantic relations are also very much linked to genre. Like, for example, news stories tend to lean on temporal and additive elaboration, like telling the story as they are with details. No, but for example, procedural health texts or SOPs for ground purpose. Now, for example, during the time of COVID, you wear face masks so that ganito, right? You have to step 6 feet away from each other because to reduce transmission. So there is always an explanation, particularly because health communicators are trained to always explain the steps. As opposed to news stories wherein you're supposed to tell the story as it is, try to find the narrative even it's quite convoluted. That's the genre of writing. You start with the most important thing first and then the details afterwards. But you cannot presuppose reasons, unless it was reported to you, you got it from a data, there's evidence towards it, So that semantic relations also come with genre. Like for example, in academic writing, we use a lot of however, we use a lot of yet, we use a lot of suggests that, because these are these are speech acts that we need to do because this is how we engage with science and in the knowledge, and so to sort of temper our arguments in a particular research article. But of course, semantic relations sort of break apart when you go to more literary writing. Like for example, poetry and spoken word, minsan maglilista ka lang, but of course, you allow the listener or the reader some freedom to interpret, so may ganon. So what exactly should we be sort of critical about when we see these conjunctions being used or this causal linkages used? So we look at equivalence. What do we say are equally important? What difference do we assess, right? So do we say use but or however? Next, we look at legitimation. And usually this is for reasons, for purpose. Why? We did this because. We did this because. We did this so that. We did this for the purpose of. And so we also look at what are the rhetorics being used to legitimize an action. And probably, syempre, when you do CDA, you look at problematic actions, right? And then you look at explanatory depth, right? Meaning, how deep are the explanations being provided? Or sinasadya ba siya na hindi detalyado? Do you make it vague? And things like that. Next, let's talk about grammatical realization. So this could be parataxis, what causes clauses as equals and but or. Next, we have hypotaxis. One clause depends on another. So this is used by because, if, when, so that. So ibig sabihin, the other clause cannot live without the other clause. So that's hypotaxis. And then we have embedding. clause functions inside the phrase, particularly as a qualifier, like for example, abnormalities which might be present. No? Or for example, I have conjunctivitis, which is a disease that of the inflammation of the outer layer of the eye. So maybe putting more explanation, etc. So that's an example of embedding. Next, we have cohesion across sentences. So it can be a references like this, that, it, they. So yung this na to, this means that. So ibig sabihin may naunang sentence that refers to what you are saying na this. No, so there's a sentence that came before that has a subject or an agent that you have to refer to this. You don't start a sentence or a paragraph with this. Usually this or that or those. Usually they come second or third sentences when you have established what you're talking about in the important. But sometimes to hide things and to make things vague, we just use this, that, they, it. A. Right? Because maybe we're trying to hide something, right? Again, rhetorical things. And then, of course, we have lexical change we explained earlier. And then we have conjunctives like however, therefore, meanwhile. So, these are more not necessarily like you can use them as a separate sentence, but we know that they won't live with the other sentence. As opposed to but, you can start your sentence with the but you can start your sentence with the however. So these are conjunctives, but again, they also still function very much as causal links. And so, through analyzing clauses and how they're linked together by these conjunctions, we can look at higher level patterns which span paragraphs or whole text, like is this pattern more of a problem, solution, like a policy or advertising or op-eds? Or is this goal, achievement or method, like recipes or standard operating procedures or strategic planning manuals? Or is this equivalence lists, like additive or elaborations? No? Like for example, these are my favorite artists or these are my favorite songs of Taylor Swift, no? Versus difference frames, no? I like this except, so, and you're trying to highlight that person or thing that you say except, right? So these are the high pattern levels, and again, putting these high pattern levels together, you have a genre, no? And we've discussed genre earlier. So, as I mentioned, what are the social theoretical payoffs for CDA in terms of analyzing causal links is, again, we have explained this earlier, legitimization, problematization, explanation, how explanatory. And then also has something to do with hegemony, whether there's equivalence or difference, and for example, globalization brings innovation. So, globalization, innovation na talaga, no? Yun na talaga. Globalization is inevitable. So, inevitability of globalization. Okay, so those kinds of things, no? So, it makes you kind of make hegemony. Or, for example, resilience is a lasting value of Filipinos. So equivalent to, or the Filipinos aren't Filipinos without resilience. So ibig sabihin, you're tied their existence with resilience, right? So ibig sabihin, if you don't show it, then, so it's hegemonic thinking. Now, in relation to appearance versus reality, we have here the logic of appearance and explanatory logic. And again, there are rhetoric functions to this. So it's either when we describe reality, we just see it as, or we just articulate them as logic of appearances. A text lists what seems to be happening, like jobs change, industries change, skills change, using additive or elaborative links, like, and also at the same time, events are presented as co-occurring facts with little time depth, weak or no causal agents, and minimal explanation. So, for example, because of this particular politician, crime rates dropped, curfews have been mandated, streets have become safer. So, again, this is very much also, aside from that kind of rhetoric, it's also a rhetoric that we see in advertisement, right? So, for example, the new iPhone 2030, priceless, something, something, right? Elegant, something, something, right? So you list down things as if they happen, no? Do your work smartly, but of course there are connections to them, but the fact that clauses aren't added, of course, to make it less clunky, I guess, no, but at the same time to make it sound more engaging and that things are happening. But of course, we have to look at this in the context of explaining, like, policy decisions, right? Explaining outcomes, no, shortcomings of a particular person in influence, no. So that would be, so a better one would be an explanatory logic, no. A text connects what's happening through causal and conditional ties, so meron siyang because, therefore, so that, if then, identifies mechanisms and agents and shows time sequences. So the problem kasi with just doing logic of appearances is that sometimes the agent is hidden, the victim or the passive subject is hidden, and so there is a rhetoric to it, no? Bakit nila tinatago yun? So things like that. So how does conjunction help in terms of, communicating policy or putting policy to power, and an example is a Hortotari report. Example, when governments or organizations narrate change as a list of new realities, they often slide from is, will, or must. So, ibig sabihin, instead of this is what we will do, but this is something that we must do. Right? And we've seen a lot of, people in power use that this is inevitable. There's no other way but this. So this is an example of a Hortotari report. It's descriptive sounding language that implicitly instructs action and again legitimizes whatever action needs to be done, whether that is a problematic action or not. Now, speaking of legitimization, how do actors or how do speakers or writers deploy legitimization of whatever they're trying to argue in their statements? And Van Leeuwen has 4 strategies. The first one is to authorize. So, like, for examples, the law applies to this, and so we'll do this. This is what experts say, and you have this a lot in nutrition, Instagram and TikTok, right? This is what the experts said, this is what studies say, and so this is one. So that legitimizes, right? Or rationalization, like a means to ends utility. So there is an explanation, a logical explanation to legitimize a particular thing or a particular activity. It can also be moral evaluation. Ginawa ko ito dahil ako ay isang Pilipino. I did this because of compassion. So we are assuming values that these are aligned to values. Or it can be through mythopoesis. So this one is more of storytelling, When I was young, this is what my father did for me, and so this is what I will do. So using narratives, fables, to be able to sort of legitimize what they're doing, because this makes narrative sense. According to Fairclough and Moff, the logic of appearances can normalize a TINA frame. A TINA frame is there is no alternative. By presenting change as inevitable and agentless, narrowing the thinkable policy space. Like globalization drives us to be more competitive, drives us to look more for digitalization. So it means that it becomes agentless because globalization, di naman siya thing, di ba? It's not even a person, right? But it is said to be having an agent, no, no. But who makes globalization go around, no? Things like that. Next, we have logic difference. Highlights, maintains, or creates boundaries and division. It sets things apart. This group is different from that. At like yung mga insert political group here. Kasi kayong mga insert ganyan. So, it means that you are legitimizing because it's different. And then, of course, that hegemonic thinking na we are correct because they are wrong. And then, of course, we have logic of equivalence, reduces or collapses differences, presenting multiple things as similar or belonging together. Like these diverse struggles are part of the same movement. So we have the hyponymy as explaining the inclusion of meaning X is a kind of Y. So for example, when you really think about it, right? Sacrifices or losses are really part of God's plan. Diba? So, you are recasting or recontextualizing the meaning of something by using hyponymy, making it a part of a thing that is more acceptable. Right? Sorrow and hardships is part of being a Filipino. And so, okay, tanggapin na lang natin na tayo ay magsakripisyo kasi Pilipino tayo. So things like that. So again, these are rhetorical devices that are being used, so that we can forward hegemonic thinking. And so Fairclough argues that semantics, through word choices, lexical chains, clauses, references, conjunctions, are really part of political work. But the way we articulate things is part of our political work, particularly when they are being publicized. Because meron kang, di ba, you had a chance to edit. You had a chance to think about it. There are many people who might have edited it, looked at it, approved it, and then nilabas mo siya. And so, what you allow for it to be a part, the way it's being they are all political work. So texts are not just describing the world. They are actively producing meaning by linking some ideas together. So as I mentioned about the articulation and disarticulation on the logic of equivalence and difference. And so the argument of Fairclough is that text is a site of struggle for meaning to establish hegemony. And so critically, what we must do is also make use of the semantics, not really make use of the semantics, but make use of this knowledge that we have to deconstruct this. So when we try to rebut, or when we try to argue against certain pronouncements, we know exactly na what you're doing is very dubious because these are the rhetorical devices that you've used, these are the linguistic choices that you've made, and they're kind of problematic. You're just hiding. So now that you are critically more literate about this, you're going to see texts more critically, You're going to see texts that they're not just what they seem, They do political work. They have intentions. Even the most unnerving of texts, right, or the mundane text, they work towards a goal. And then there's also, in terms of semantics, colonization and appropriation. So according to Chuliriarchy and Fairclough, there are things that dominant cultures do, over less dominant cultures or marginalized culture, and the one is colonization. Of course, we know what colonization means. It is taking some, well, it is a very loaded term, but we know exactly what it means, historically and also in the present. So it's the imposition of global discourses into local context. So imagine, when you talk about, let's say, describing
yung paghahabi ng mga indigenous peoples and you use the language of fashion, like Western fashion, that's an example of colonization, right? Or for example, you use Western ideas to be able to explain Filipino values. That's an example of colonization. But what is a little bit more worse for me is appropriation, is the local reworking of these discourses into something that make it more global. Like for example, Ikigai. Oh my God, I hate that. I hate how it's been appropriated into something that is very human resource, but it's about work related. But Ikigai, at least no, in the Japanese context, no, it's really about finding meaning in life. But it becomes like it's something that is now being appropriated by neoliberal actors. No, seminars are being done. How do you find your Ikigai? So another example would be oh my God, we have a lot of appropriators using Filipino terms for restaurants and for products, no? So this is an example of another appropriation. Or for example, ina-appropriate yung sexism, no, as a term against anti-man instead of its feminist roots, no? So those types of things, no, and these are both very dangerous, no, and the hegemonies of domination and inequality and oppression, no, are being discursively deployed by these semantic actions. And so how do we now look at the texts that we are trying to study, no, and diagnose them, no? So a quick diagnostic toolkit would be one. Look at the connectors, conjunctions, reference, and then the other things like and, or. So look at appearances like and also, at the same time, meanwhile, or is it explanatory because, therefore, so that, because this one removes agency. This one has some form of accountability, agency, etc. But also, even if you have this, how is it being done? Is it being legitimized? If it's a problematic thing, is it being placed as a part of a whole, etc. Next, we also have to look at the grammatical choices. No, is this the appearances? No, like do we use parataxis like coordination and but? No, do we see them as existing both, or is it hypotaxis wherein one clause is subordinate? And then also we check about nominalizations. No, like for example, globalization is the key to success. Like, and now globalization is now a thing that can do something, diba? When in fact it's actually a verb. You globalize, right? And so, for example, education is the key to success. So now education is an agent, or again, no, it's more agentic. Like for example, education drives success. So now education can drive things. Drive what? Again, making things vague, representing globalization, education, innovation, artificial intelligence as agentic. There are motivations why the speaker or the writer wants to put it that way. And so we have to be very careful and very suspicious of those. And then, of course, we have the time depth. Is it all in the present? No? The example that I'm giving you about AI driving innovations as if innovations have not happened before. No? Or, for example, in the new age, in this day and age, in our contemporary times, ganyan, in the time of social media, etc. No? So, it means that they just so happens to happen together. And that we have to do it because they happen together, something to like that. And then explanatory, sequences, and duration. So like I said, this one is a little bit more safer because it tells you that something happened before, so you can make decisions about okay, A caused B, and so you can sort of trace accountability, trace some form of transparency, and then look at is, and then how it becomes must. Again, legitimization, like policy inevitability, and then values and legitimation. like you never question like efficiency and innovation as evidently good. Like we know that competitiveness is not necessarily equally good, no, or innovation. So again, and then of course about purpose clauses, like so that to rationalize, no, certain actions, no, or events. Now, when we actually look at the clause themselves, there are certain dimensions that we have to look at. So under the first dimension, we have exchange. No, so there are two types of exchange in the clause. No, the kind of interaction happening. So we're talking about speech acts now. So it can be a knowledge exchange, like focus on information, like statements or questions, or it can be activity exchange, focused on getting things done, like demands or authors. So dito, declarative sentences and interrogative sentences, and this one are imperative sentences, no, or request sentences. Next, under the dimension 2 of the clause level, the clauses have speech functions. It can be what people do with words, no, based on J.J. Austin. Right? So it can be a statement, gives information. It can be a question, requests information. It can be a demand, requesting or ordering an action. It can be an offer, volunteering an action. Or it can be an acknowledgement, responding or recognizing, who you're conversing with or you're talking to. Now, the third dimension is speech function. So, under that, we have grammatical mood. The sentence that realizes this function. So, ayun na nga yung declarative, no, expresses statements, interrogative, asks questions, and imperative, issues and demands or requests. So, ayun na nga yung in-explain natin. However, these are blurred because there are certain strategic actions which are disguised as communicative actions. So again, we go back to Habermas' communicative theory, no? Na, for example, talaga ba na ginawa niya yon? Or, pwede mo bang gawin to? So again, that is formed as an interrogative, no? But that is actually an imperative, right? Can you do this? It's a question. It's an interrogative, but it's actually, a request. Okay? Or for example, you say that nurses must take care of their patients. And I am telling this, I am a head nurse, and I'm telling this to my staff nurses. So it is a declarative. I'm telling them that nurses must take care of patients. But I am actually doing imperative. So again, we have to be very careful na parang, declarative statement, yan lang naman. Hindi ko naman sinabing gawin mo. Pero syempre, there is something, we have to look at not just the communicative action of what is said, but the strategic action of what is said. So what are some social research issues that these queries are applicable? So first, of course, yung communicative versus strategic action by Habermas. Communicative action seeks understanding, strategic action seeks control, but CDA examines when one masquerades as the other. So, yun yung example natin. And next is promotional culture, no? By Featherstone and Wernick. Modern advertising and politics blur facts, values, and predictions. A neutral policy report may actually be promotional. So, ibig sabihin, did you know that something is like this? No, it can be actually promoting a place or a thing. Or for example, a politician, saying what is happening about, a certain place that he has jurisdiction. Of course, sort of promoting themselves na rin, no? In terms of public policy documents often use hortatory reports, statements that describe reality but implicitly demand compliance. Like, for example, the new age requires continuous learning. So, there is compliance to that, right? Globalization compels us to become more competitive. So, again, these are declarations, but these are actually demands or requirements or compliance. No? And then research interviews, even neutral, they involve power. Who asks questions, who provides answers, and how demands for information are framed. And so again, a more critical way of looking at research interviews is to be able to identify positionality, and you will learn more about positionality, how your effect as a researcher. Let's say, for example, you're interviewing someone who is of a lower class, or of a marginalized sector, and how your presence as someone who may be in a position of privilege, might be doing more than just be asking questions, in the subtlety of things. Yan. Next, we also have to look at the different types of statements that are being used in a particular corpus or text that we are trying to analyze. First are realist statements or statements of facts. These assert something about reality, about what is, was, or has been the case. Our realist statements are about things that are not yet real, or predictions, hypotheticals, or imagined scenarios. Evaluations are statements that express attitudes, judgments, or value positions. So for example, for realist statements, the employment rate rose last month. So that's an example of a realist statement. And a realist statement is the economy will grow by 5% next year. So that's a prediction. For hypotheticals, if interest rise, prices might go down. Ayan, so yon. And then for evaluation, like this is a good policy. Evaluations can be explicit or implicit, like suggested by tone, choice of words, or context. So for example, I think this plan will succeed shows level of certainty, and then this plan will succeed presents the claim is objective and factual. So again, that is more of evaluation. You didn't say, even if you say that that they will both succeed, I think this plan will succeed, or this plan will succeed. The certainty of the objective of the evaluation is different. So Wernick calls today's society a promotional culture, because nearly every cultural product, from advertisements to university brochures and also political arenas, perform three simultaneous functions. And these are representing, describing, or symbolizing a situation, person, or event; advocating, promoting or endorsing what is being described; anticipating, projecting a desired future, creating a vision of what will happen. So this is significant for CDA because it shows that texts are rarely neutral. For instance, a city government's annual report might claim to inform citizens, but it also subtly promotes investments, attracts tourism, and projects a positive image of local governance. So again, like I said, because we are doing promotional culture, especially now, in a time that we are in a presentation and performance culture on social media, this is so much still very much clear. And so what is the sociological importance of this? So there's now a blurring of fact and value and strategy. Promotional text often make subjective evaluation sound objective. There's also a blurring of fact and predictions. They present the future as if it is inevitable, reducing space for alternative possibilities. Like there's no alternative in law. Like again, when we talk about globalization, artificial intelligence, digitalization, etc. And it also shows the performative power of text. They don't just describe the word, they help create it. So this has been our ongoing conversations ever since the very first session of our class. If policy papers say we are becoming a world community or a global community, they help normalize and enact that reality. Because remember, policies are really meant to change and influence behavior. And so this is connected to Habermas' theory of communicative versus strategic action. Promotional culture leans towards strategic action and seeks to achieve outcomes rather than just encourage open debate. Styles change, how grammatical moods can be used for things that they aren't supposed to be used in the originality. So, and that is why we need CDA for us to be able to uncover this. So for example, declarative, you have a subject and a verb. So usually its typical speech function is statement of fact or realist, but it can also function as a demand. I expect this report tomorrow. So it's a declarative statement, but it's demanding something. this project is a success. So it is a declarative statement, but it's also an evaluation. This policy will save lives. It's declarative, but it's also a prediction. So how is it used? How it can be used in CDA? For example, in a government report, globalization is inevitable, sounds factual, but legitimizes neoliberal policies. Next, we have interrogative, yes, no. No? Question that elicits information. So, for example, can function as a polite request or demand, can you send me the file? So, that was an example I was giving earlier. Can be rhetorical. Is this what we want for our future? So, for example, ito ba talaga ang gusto nating buhay? Ito ba ang Pilipinas na gusto natin? Tatayo na lang ba tayo dito? So, again, they have rhetorical functions. So, for example, for classroom teacher, can we keep the noise down? Actually demanding silence. For example naman, ng isa pang interrogative is a WHS, no? So we have open question seeking elaboration, can function as an indirect criticism or challenge. Like, why would you do that? Can introduce new topics and steer discussion strategically. So, for example, in a political debate, you said you want to do a smart city, so how will you fund this? So you said you're going to end, to clear the country of drugs in 6 months. How do you plan to do it? No? So again, this is not just coming out of curiosity, but again, there is a strategy, a rhetorical motivation why this was asked. Next, we have imperative, no subject, like a command. So it can also be an advice, an encouragement, an invitation, a promotion. Join us! Can be softened with politeness. Please take a seat. No? So for example, a health campaign is get vaccinated now. Imperative function as a public health intervention. So it can also be a declarative with tag question. Isn't it? It can function as a persuasion, like this is the right decision, isn't it? So it can pressure agreement or soft coercion. We all agree that this is the best approach, don't we? So it pushes people to conformity. And then you can have minor clauses like often statement or prompt, like can function as cues to continue. No, for example, and the result. So wala siyang subject, wala siyang verb, pero there is a parang it drives meaning, no? Can soften demands. Report due today. So, and then for an interview, for example, and after that, just to keep the participant talking and not a full question. Alright, so these are the things that we discussed for this session. It's quite a mouthful. If you don't remember some of those things, you can go back and scrub back the video and remember what they mean and how they're used and how they're applied in doing CDA.